You still have to hit the button. So now we are live. All right.
Nice.
Welcome in, everybody, to our live stream here, a little Bear and Balance. It's been a while since we came to you and wanted to talk about a few things. Akiem Hicks finally signed a deal, a little longer in the waiting than I maybe anticipated early on in the offseason, but he's finally signed. He's down in Tampa Bay, and I thought it'd be a good time to now talk about the legacies of these three guys. So we'll start a podcast here in a little bit, but we'll just kind of just beforehand. It kind of hits you that this is really turning a leaf.
Yeah, I mean, when the Bears acquired those three players, and then the way they played, the first few times, the first few years in Chicago, I thought they're going to be Bears for life. I mean, Hicks loves the city, and same with A-Rob and Mack, and it's like, man, these guys are going to be the parts of the foundation of the future. And things change in a hurry in the National Football League, they say, and we're seeing that firsthand as Bears fans.
Yeah, it's Jerry Glanville. There's a Jerry Glanville quote on one of those old like NFL Films tapes that I watched probably 1,000 times growing up, and he was like giving the referee a hard time, and he's like, NFL stands for not for long in this league. You keep making those calls, and it's just like you got to remind yourself this is a fast moving business. This is loyalties change very quickly. A player who you think is completely dedicated to the team might demand a trade, the next offseason, or, a new general manager comes in and says, this isn't my guy. This doesn't fit my scheme. I'm not into this. So it is interesting. It's interesting when you're trying to look at things from a, historical perspective and especially trying to do history in real time, which we're going to do a little bit here today. And I find that to be a difficult ask because when things have been settled and etched in stone, and you can kind of go back and evaluate, this is a little harder, but I think it's an interesting exercise to go back and do that.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you mentioned the NFL Films. We're just talking about this in a chat earlier this week, and I grew up in NFL Films, so like the history of the game to me is something that I've always been aware of. I'm not saying I'm like a historian, but it's something I've always been aware of, especially with the Bears, but throughout all the football follies and those NFL films, those what was the name of was Cicada? Was that the
John? Is it John?
It's not John Cicada. That's the Latin singer.
That's not right. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think
it's the voice, right? It's
the
those
announcers.
Voices. Oh man, I love those. That's the frozen tundra. It's like, all those old school things, I grew up on those. They were always on the weekends, and, Earl Campbell, Tony Dorsett, Terry Bradshaw, all those old school things got me really loving the sport of football. And of course, the Bears have a tremendous history as well. And we're going to try and figure out where these three players fit in that history.
John Facenda.
Yeah. That was close.
You're like, not John. I'm like, well, I think it is, but I guess I got the last name wrong. You let me down.
To be fair, it was my last name. Yeah, I did lead you wrong.
Those Sam Spence is the guy that did the NFL Films music. A lot of that classical music. He's a conductor, and I actually have a Pandora station of Sam Spence radio, and it'll just play NFL Films music. And it's kind of incredible.
I gotta find that because I like I have a station on my Spotify that's voted to like theme songs.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get one if it's on there. I'm gonna
put in Sam Spence.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's the guy, and they have like a record. Of course, I don't have a record player, but I mean I'm not an audiophile, so it would be cool to have that. That's how nerdy I am, is that if I bought a record player, like an old school record player, to get some old records, I would buy NFL Films music as one of my first 3 purchases, because I find it, I love it. I love to run with it. Like if there's something about it that just gets me really amped. And again, this is a product of a misspent youth. This is what I did with my life. Was I watched NFL Films. That's all I did. All I did was football stuff growing up.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I guess it's that era.
led to a lot of bad things like blogging and podcasting.
I
So,
know, right? Jeez.
all right, well, let's get into this. Let's get into this podcast here. I will pause for a second and then I'll start. Welcome to Bear of Balance. I'm Jeff Berckes, a writer for Windy City Gridiron, and I'm joined by the boss over at that fine website, Lester A. Wiltfong Jr. Lester, we are in the off season, but we just had a former Bear sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to try to chase a ring. Thought it was a good time to come on and talk about some legacies of departed Bears players.
Yeah, we got Hicks, we got A-Rob, we have Khalil Mack. We were part of the original Windy City Gridiron crew that put together that top 100 list. So going through these guys and kind of seeing, where they may fit in the history. I mean, these are all three very popular Bears, very good Bears. So it's curious to kind of see where they all fit in the long and storied history of the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, you mentioned the top 100 list, and we're going to be referring to that a lot tonight. Maybe we can link to that in the story on the website
For sure.
if you're having trouble finding it. Of course, you can just throw it in a Google search if you wanted to refresh your memory. So there were six of us that went through a process. Of course, our site historian Jack Silverstein being one of them. The two of us, Jacob Infante, helped put this together. Optimus Prime, Eric. I don't know
Eric Christopher DeWachter.
Duwachter.
I don't know. I butchered
Sorry,
his
ECD,
name.
if I did not pronounce
It's
that right.
ECD at top prime.
Of course. And then, of course, Sam Householder being the sixth guy. So we had a really good, diverse group of guys that voted on this, that had come at it from different angles. Went through 10 rounds of betting. I led the scoring process and all this stuff. I remember it was just kind of a little bit of madness, and trying to rank all these Hall of Famers and getting different perspectives, getting on the same page. But we'll refer to that quite a bit here because I do think it's important to try to understand the context of where these guys fit in the pantheon of Chicago Bears. And I wrote about each of these guys in an article series a couple weeks ago called the Exit Interview Series, all three of these guys. And I did try to place them in. So I'd be curious to hear your feedback. If for each of these guys, we'll talk about where I thought that they fit, and then we can kind of go from there. But why don't we start off with Hicks, because he just signed here with Tampa Bay. And I think that the conclusion that I came to about Akiem Hicks was that everything about this was good. I just wish we had more of it because he's such an interesting personality. He's a really good player, and it would be really fun to have seen his entire career in navy and orange, just not the way that it works sometimes. They didn't get him until he was entering, I think, year 5 of his career, and now he's going to go finish his career elsewhere. But I just wish that we had more Akiem Hicks in Soldier Field wearing navy and orange.
The Bears were his third team. I mean, he started off with the Saints. I think he was a third round draft pick. The Saints weren't sure what to do with him. They traded him to the Patriots. And then, of course, Bill Belichick, rarely does he let players go that are still productive. He decided to let Hicks go, and the Bears, scooped him up. That was probably arguably one of Ryan Pace's best decisions as the GM of the Bears, bringing Hicks in. Hicks, I think, played, 6 years in Chicago. It's just a disruptive force. He only made the one Pro Bowl, but you could argue that he could have been in a few more. It's just his numbers were great. The injury bug got him the last couple of years, so that kind of hurts his overall place in Bears history. But such a fun player to watch. I mean, he truly was the engine that made that defense go from the 5-tech defensive end spot. He moved up and down that line quite a bit. He was just, when you put in the all 22. And we'll talk about Mack in a second, but Hicks and Mack, those two guys, even when they didn't make the play, they did something that was really cool to see.
Yeah, he was a guy that could consistently ragdoll offensive linemen, right? Like he would just, there's just a moment in time when a guy like that decides, like, no, I'm sick of this. I'm winning this rep. And just throws a guy that is, a giant human being, 330-pound guards just getting ragdolled and thrown back into the quarterback. And that's the kind of ability that he had. He was just, he was a bear. Like, I mean, he looked the part, and everything about him is pretty interesting. I'm sharing this on the YouTube channel. Those of you that are listening, if you haven't checked this out on YouTube, go ahead, check us out on the Second City Gridiron YouTube. Hit subscribe. That's really helpful for us. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. But anyway, I'm sharing this picture, and this is from my championship belt series. And when I was going through at that time, the somewhat modern history of the Chicago Bears players and trying to determine who the best player was at the time, it was pretty clear that Hicks had it for a couple years. This was the guy that was the best player on the Chicago Bears in 2016 and 2017. And that's pretty significant in terms of your legacy to this team, when you can say like, yeah, this was the best player on the team at the time. Now, these were bad teams. These were these John Fox teams. They didn't win a lot of games, but again, like you said, you could argue this was Ryan Pace's best move. It's certainly his best free agency signing. And it's one of those moves that I think a lot of people say like, oh, sign him to a prove it deal. I don't know how you feel about that term. I feel like it's used way too much. He was signing, he was this third team, like you said, he's coming off, not maybe the most productive years that he had to start his career. He signed a moderate deal, and it wasn't for very long, and he earned that second contract from the Bears. So I think he quickly established himself as the guy that started to rebuild this team for that 2018 peak.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely a key to the changeover to 3-4 defense. I think it was a 2-year, $10 million deal when he first, came to Chicago, and he outperformed that, right away. I mean, I think his first game he got a sack. He just was disruptive from the start. I mean, he was, Patty Curl talks about it. He was a bear, a real bear. I mean, a giant of a man. He would just, dominate games. And, I think it was might have been Brian Baldinger had a series on YouTube, and it was actually a one-on-one just talking to Hicks, and Hicks would break down some of his moves, and just a phenomenal athlete, the way he thinks about the game, a true student of what he does. And he really, he was great for Chicago, and he said it himself. He wished he could have finished his career in Chicago. Things went sour last off season. He wanted to trade. The Bears said he could find a trade. I just think that at some point something soured between him and Ryan Pace or Matt Nagy. It kind of lingered throughout the year, and then towards the end of the season, of course, at some point he was sent home. I mean, he didn't even get to finish the season with the team. He just it just went bad. And then, of course, when they got rid of Nagy, they got rid of Pace. As a fan, I'm thinking, oh my God, maybe Hicks can come back because yes, he's not the perfect fit for the 3-technique defensive tackle in the new scheme, but he's still a penetrating one-gap guy. If you cut his snaps down, which I'm sure that's what the Bucs are going to do, he's going to be a force.
Yeah, I mean, I think he got into an altercation with Nagy the day that we were at camp together. I think
that was the day. Yes,
there was something that happened.
Some drama behind the scenes.
Yeah. Right. We didn't know. We just knew that he wasn't on the field, and we kind of heard some rumblings, and we're seeing a little chatter on Twitter and stuff. And we're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let's talk about. I want to talk about two more things for sure about Hicks, and one of them is the top 100, and then I want to talk about what I think could be a future in Chicago. So the top 100 list with Hicks is interesting because at the time we had already identified him as a top 100 player.
Yeah.
And so I think Kyle Long was still on the team, and Kyle Long was identified as a top 100 player. And his last year, was a bad year. He didn't add to his legacy in a positive way. And Hicks was on the list of about 10 spots later than Long. So Long came in at 75, and Hicks was identified at number 83. Since that time that we did the list, it's been a couple of seasons, and he's been hurt for most of those seasons. But I think that the narrative around Hicks missing a lot of the 2020 season was that the defense splits, the defensive splits from when he was on the field and when he was off the field were really drastic.
Yeah.
And it showed just how valuable he was. And he almost got a bump to his legacy by the fact that he wasn't on the field and the team just nosedive.
Yeah, that was 2019. He only played 5 games. That was the year he had the
Just 2019. Okay.
that freakish injury to the elbow. He got
Mhm.
stuck between helmets, and it just, he tried coming back. I think he came back for the Packers game, and he gave. I mean, when he came back, I mean, he talked about it. He wanted to play the Packers. He had no business playing against the Packers. He played that Packer game and right back to IR. But that's who Hicks was. I mean, Hicks understood that rivalry. He understood what that meant to Bears fans and what it meant to the franchise. So he wanted to give his all to be out there, and he did that. And then in the following year, he only missed the one game. But then last season, he only played, I think, in 9 games. So like you said, the injuries when he was out, and he missed quite a bit. 2019 and 2021. That defense really fell off when he wasn't in there.
Right. So the argument for me was that I think that he could make a modest bump to where he was at based on the additional 3 years that he played.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't able to move him above Kyle Long. I thought that Kyle Long was a really good ceiling to start the conversation. So Long came in at number 75. And then I looked at the players underneath Kyle Long, and I found a lot of offensive linemen. So Kyle Long was in at 75. Mike Pyle, who was the center for the Bears in the 60s. So he won a championship in 1963. And then Big Cat Williams, who I think is just a fan favorite for those that were around to watch, Big Cat play from 91 to 2002. He made a Pro Bowl in 2001. So kind of the last little bit of his career. It was almost kind of like a career achievement award for Big Cat. And I found that this was the area that made the most sense to put Hicks. And I kind of struggled on where that would be. I ended up in the article putting him after Big Cat. I think that there's an argument that you could make that puts him right after Long. But I mean, again, these are 3 players. Mike Pyle played for an entire decade. Big Cat played for a decade plus. He played for 11 seasons. So these guys just had a little bit more in terms of their longevity to the franchise. And you start to have I don't know, I have a hard time differentiating between these peaks and these greatness and the longevity kind of arguments. And so it's more of like penciling him in after Big Cat, but that's where I had. What about you? When you read that article and you saw my placement of Hicks around, the Big Cat Williams area, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think with Big Cat, he was a really good right tackle for the Bears, and he was one of the better right tackles in the game for a few seasons. But at that era, the right tackle didn't get as much respect as a left tackle. These days, both sides are usually, you have to have studs on both sides. Back then, your right tackle was still the classic mauler. He was more of a run first blocker, and that's what Big Cat was. But like you said, he did get a Pro Bowl late in the season. So that kind of helped, solidify him, his place on our list, obviously. And then with Kyle Long, he had a shorter career, but I think his highs, 3 straight Pro Bowls, that kind of, if you're going to have Hicks somewhere near there, that I think Kyle Long is a good comp. Hicks doesn't have the same Pro Bowl accolades that Kyle Long does, but I think from, the shorter season or the shorter careers, I think Kyle Long, Akiem Hicks, I think it makes sense. So with Hicks, I mean, he's up there among the league leaders in a few categories for the Bears on defense. So, his time was short, but he, like we talked about, he made an impact in Chicago.
Yeah. The last thing I want to talk about with Hicks, and then we'll move on to Mac, but I think that with his personality and just how good of a player he was, but maybe not, he's not this like multi all pro guy that might draw interest from like a national level perspective. Hicks feels to me like a guy that has a place in Chicago media when he's done. I mean, he's not going to play for 7 more years with Tampa and all. That's who he identifies with, right? Like this is the majority of his career was played in Chicago. He made a mark. That he's a fan favorite. To me, this was kind of a blend between Alex Brown, who was a real fan favorite, and Anthony Spice Adams, who didn't make an impact on the field much at all, but was a very entertaining guy and was a beloved teammate. It seems like he's kind of the combination between those two and maybe a better player than Alex Brown. And I think that there's a role for him in Chicago media if that's something he wants to pursue.
Yeah, he had a role, I think it was on ESPN for a little while. He was one of their guys they bring in, during the week after games, and there was a falling out at the time. I forget the exact story, but I know there was something where he kind of stopped doing his radio spot. But he's, like you said, he has a great personality. He was a good player. You mentioned Spice. I think he still does the gig with Fox 32 locally. I think Alex Brown did some stuff with Comcast for several years. I'm not sure if he's still there or not, but those are good comps. I mean, that's definitely a place where Akiem belongs. And he's talked, like we said, he's talked about how much he likes the city. And it is reciprocated from Bears fans. Bears fans all love Akiem Hicks. I mean, when Hicks left, I mean, the stuff on social media, it's, good luck Akiem Hicks. A lot of Bears fans, especially this year since the Bears are going to be down, we're going to be pulling for the Bucks and for Akiem Hicks. Yeah, it's Tom Brady, but it's Akiem Hicks. You know what I mean? That would be so cool to see Hicks go out with a ring. If it's not the Bears and it's Hicks, that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I think that the falling out on the radio thing had to do with someone making a comment about his injury and kind of almost
Sounds right.
maybe somewhat of an insensitive way to say it. I think it was probably taken wrong and it just sort of escalated. And yeah, I don't know about that. So maybe with not those guys, but maybe somewhere else. I want him to stick around Chicago in some way, shape, or form.
For sure.
Let's go back a little earlier to the offseason. Let's cover Khalil Mack. So Khalil Mack's traded to the Chargers. The Bears are able to get, a nice amount of draft capital in return from the Chargers for that. They got their second rounder that was used on Jaquan Brisker. They also got a future sixth that they ended up flipping for present seventh rounders that they used at the end of the draft. One of those was the punter that they drafted, and I can't remember what the other pick was off the top of my head. But they kind of closed the book on the Khalil Mack trade. I went back and I had applied some math to how much that ended up costing the Bears in terms of present value, which it's hard when you're grading a trade because in the moment you're going to apply some factors with future picks, right? So if you aren't giving up those picks until later drafts, those are generally like devalued in the calculation. And so there's that present value isn't there. But when you're looking at it from a historical standpoint, well, those have already happened. So you're actually just going to use the full value when you calculate it. And I used our friend Brad Spielberger's chart, and I charted what the Bears gave up and what the Bears got back. And it ended up being something like the 35th pick or something like that. So kind of like a high second rounder for 4 years of Khalil Mack. And I don't know, just off the top of your head, do you feel like that feels okay? I mean, it's a lot of money and draft capital, but do you feel like from the trade perspective that felt like it created enough value?
Well, his first year in Chicago was phenomenal. I mean, he was, the Bears made that deal thinking he was the final piece of the puzzle of a team they thought was ready. And, they did pretty good his first season in 2018 and, made it to the playoffs. And, it just, since that time, we talk about the injury of Hicks, the injuries kind of got Mack as well. I mean, he fought through a lot of it. But this last couple seasons, he couldn't get through it all. I mean, he missed 9 games in 2021. He was banged up quite a bit in 2020. I mean, he may have had surgery last offseason to kind of get some things cleaned up. So he was, again, we talk about Akiem Hicks when you watch the All 22. Mack didn't get the sacks. His first season in Chicago, he had 12 and a half. The most he had since then was 9. So he didn't have the huge sack numbers. But he was always around the quarterback. He was always getting double teamed. He made an impact on that defense every time he was out there, whether he was effective or not. He's a guy that the opposing coaches had to always know where he was. And, the Bears were smart with how they used him. I thought Vic Fangio dropped him back in coverage a bit too much for my liking, but, he plays outside linebacker. That's what has to happen every now and again in that scheme. So overall, it was a good deal.
Let me probe that a little bit because I think that Fangio overall used him well. Vic Fangio is kind of beyond reproach, right? I mean, he's a genius, and the league is now kind of taken by storm at the Vic Fangio scheme, which is they're calling it the Brandon Staley effect, which is just like, Okay. I mean, Brandon Staley was on that staff in 2018 with Khalil Mack too. So that's part of it. And that's why he, with the Chargers now wanted to bring Mack into the fold, because he knows how important that is to that defense. I wonder if, again, if the double doink doesn't happen, that field goal goes through, the Bears advance a little bit further in the playoffs, and maybe Vic Fangio doesn't have the opportunity to take the job in Denver, because a lot of times teams get impatient and then they want to hire a guy early. And Vic Fangio stays around, or maybe the Bears, maybe Nagy actually looked at the staff and said, "Who's internal that I could promote a young buck?" And how about this Brandon Staley guy, right? Just someone other than Chuck Pagano. And I don't want to drag Chuck Pagano here, but it did seem like Pagano was kind of at the end of his coaching rope. He was calling a lot of vanilla schemes. He really didn't seem like he brought any creativity, and he kind of just said, "Well, I've got Khalil Mack. I'm just going to sit him out there in a wide 9 and just kind of let the offense take him out of the game." Do you think that Mack's, legacy is impacted negatively by the Chuck Pagano hire?
That's a good point, because we saw last year with Sean Desai, he used Mack a bit more creatively. He did a few different things where he would scheme them up. And now it's funny to say, well, you shouldn't scheme up a great player like Khalil Mack. Yeah, you do, because an offense's job is to take him away.
Right.
You have to counter that. And like you said, Chuck Pagano, he didn't do too much. I was excited with that hire at the time, because what he did in Baltimore, he did a lot of really unique blitzes. His packages were really cool stuff to watch. He did a lot of cool stuff in the back end too. He would disguise those coverages. And like you said, a lot of the stuff he did in Chicago, more vanilla. Maybe he was just kind of playing out the string. But then we saw Sean Desai. He kind of, he took things in a little different direction, and he realized, I have these weapons here in Mack, and then with Quinn as well on the other side. And he would move them around, and he would kind of scheme them up and scheme them looks to go one-on-one. And look, if you can scheme Khalil Mack one-on-one, that's a win every time. So Chuck Pagano should have done that more. I think, like you said, maybe that does hurt his legacy in Chicago a bit, because those numbers weren't quite as big, because they expected Mack just to do it all on his own.
Yeah, and I think it was one of those conversations that I feel like I was having a lot with people, where they're like, "Well, look at his sack numbers. He's really not that big." And it's like, he is impacting every play he's out there. Like they are accounting for that. Is the guy that they're looking at and saying 52's over there, like we're running this way, right? And it had to be very frustrating for him to be put in that position and not be able to make the impact that he was capable of making. But in terms of legacy, so back to that top 100 list. When I looked at the top 100 list, I mean, when he came in 2018, this was, again, the best defense in the league. He's the best player. He comes in with the peak performance, right? He's got a strip sack touchdown against the Packers on a primetime game on opening week, right? Like, I mean, you just can't write a script better. Of course, the Bears did not win that game. They ended up beating the Packers later that year, which I think was the only Packers win in the Nagy era. But he really did make this huge entry, right? Like, this was you couldn't write a better WWE entry than Max, getting traded late in the offseason, or in the preseason, really, and just coming in. He wasn't really in game shape yet, and he just sort of just took over. And that whole year, he was one of the best players in the league. Now, Aaron Donald won the MVP, but Mack was the only player other than Donald to get defensive player of the year. Donald won the defensive player of the year, not MVP, but Mack was the only player to get votes for that award other than Aaron Donald. So I mean, he was, one of the best 2 players in the league. And it looked like, hey, this is just going to keep happening. This future's bright. And when I went back and looked at the top 100 list, the similarities between him and Julius Peppers were so strong. I mean, the Bears signed Julius Peppers to a big free agents contract. It wasn't a trade, but other than that, a lot of money going to an established defensive star. I mean, Julius Peppers was already on a path when he came to the Bears, and obviously Khalil Mack was too. He already won a defensive player of the year, and so they both had first team all pro seasons. They both had 3 Pro Bowls in Navy and Orange, and they're both going to go off and Peppers played a number of additional seasons. And I'm sure Mack has quite a bit left in him. And I couldn't get over just how similar their impact was. And when I came down to trying to figure out where they fit in the pantheon, and Wally Chambers is the other guy that I at least have to mention. He's a guy from
Yeah.
the 70s. The Bears drafted him. They were terrible in the 70s. He was a defensive tackle. He's kind of like a Tommy Harris of his time. He was really, really good, and he was making Pro Bowls and all pros on a terrible Bears team. I mean, it's really significant. He was very good. He got hurt in a Pro Bowl, and he just was never the same. But the Bears were still able to get a first round pick for him from the Buccaneers, who are terrible. The Buccaneers pick ends up being really high, and the Bears draft Dan Hampton from that. So it's like kind of this really kind of crazy history. But to me, those three guys kind of now all grouped together for what they did in a Bears uniform. And what I came to the conclusion of was that Mack was the best player on the best defense. Peppers was arguably the best player on the best defense, but he had a first ballot Hall of Famer behind him and Brian Urlacher. And with Mack being the face of the franchise, I penciled him in above Peppers, but I still am not sure I'm right. So what about you? Where do you think he belongs on this list?
Again, that was a great comp. Those guys, I think that's exactly what it is. You took a Mack. He was the face of the franchise when he was in Chicago for that defense. And, if you look at Peppers, it's funny because you mentioned Peppers, Chambers, Mack. Those three are three in a row on the all-time Bears sack record. Peppers is 15th, Chambers 16th, Mack 17th. It's just a sack and a half separates those three players. So, again, they all had short careers in Chicago. But I think you nailed it. Mack was the best defensive player on his time in Chicago, whereas Peppers, he had a few other guys that are around him that were, you mentioned Urlacher, first ballot Hall of Famer. Peppers would be the same. And, I think that's the best way to look at it. Khalil Mack's legacy in Chicago, we talked about it at the top, I assumed he'd be in Chicago for the rest of his career. Again, things happen quickly in the NFL, the Bears made a change. It was the right move to make at the time. That was the only way to do it with the contract. It was kind of like with Peppers. When Peppers' huge contract he had, the Bears at that time, they kept borrowing from the bank of Peppers.
Right.
Same thing with Khalil Mack. The last few years, the Bears would borrow from his contract to kind of pay things, kept pushing money in the future. The bill always comes due. And, it was best for Ryan Poles to just bite the bullet this offseason. Hey, look, we're going to have a reset year here. Khalil Mack is a fantastic player. Let's get the most we can for him. Second and a sixth. I don't think they could have done much better than that.
Yeah, and I just put up another visual here on YouTube, and that's again from the championship belt series. And
these aren't Whiskey Rangers graphics; these are all your graphics.
These are mine. Yeah,
later.
Whiskey Ranger disappeared on me, so this would have been much better had Wild made all of these, but he stopped somewhere in the third installment of this series. So the quality goes down quite a bit.
But these are good though. These are good in their own right. A little different.
These are
different feeling.
Part 5 isn't bad, but there are some good ones, and this one was kind of fun. I liked how Club Dub Fight Club is a great name for this imaginary fight. But Mack was clearly the best player on the field, in almost every game he played. But he's the best player on the field for the Bears in 2018, 2019. And this 2019 is when this came out. And I think 2020, that would have extended to 2020. There's going to be an interesting conversation that I'm going to have at some point and determine if the belt changed hands last year in 2021 when he, basically was injured and he can't reclaim it because he doesn't play for the team anymore. Yeah. So at this point, the belt is either being held by somebody else. I have an idea, but I have an idea too. He's not exactly having a very, positive off season right now, so I'm kind of holding off on that. And then I think that but again, it's significant. He was the belt holder for 3 years at least, and so again that adds to his legacy. Again, to put a guy at 50th overall and have him only have played for 4 years is a statement. That is saying something. But this was a very, and one of those years being injured reserve, and another one of those years fighting through an injury. So, but it is a significant legacy that he gave the Bears, because it was this fast rise for this really fun year, and he was an incredible player. And it was the face of the franchise. They put him on the bobblehead, right? They did everything to basically say, like, this is the guy. You guys love linebackers. This Chicago, you love linebackers. Here's another one in this great pantheon of linebackers.
That's a good point. You talk about they put him on that bobblehead. I mean, I think that was key of that season. I mean, the franchise knew what they had in him. They knew he was the guy, and they wanted to play that up as much as possible. So I think putting him where you got him on our top 100. I think when we eventually do go back and revisit the list in a year or two, I think where you got him is probably right around where he'll end up.
All right, well, let's pause right here for a quick commercial break, and then on the other side of this, we'll get into the thorny legacy of Allen Robinson. All right, Lester, we're back. So let's talk about A-Rob here. And I think this one's a little bit harder, because when I came into this exercise, I thought for sure that I would have very nice things to say about Allen Robinson and his legacy and where he fits in the top 100 for the Chicago Bears. But when I really started to go back and look at things, I found it difficult to make a positive argument for his impact on the Bears. It just fell well short of what his talent level told us he could do.
Part of it obviously is the offenses he played in, the quarterbacks he played with. I think if he had a little different situation, his legacy would have been a little shine a little brighter in Chicago. But it's hard. I mean, especially with how things kind of ended up the last season. I mean, yeah, he missed some games because of COVID. But the effort when he was out there. I hate questioning a guy's effort because no one knows exactly what's going on here. And then of course you look at like I said, the situation. How Matt Nagy chose to use his receivers is just unreal. Allen Robinson should have held every single receiving record in Chicago. There's no doubt in my mind he should have had that, but the contract status kind of got the best of him. Things soured again with him, Ryan Pace, Matt Nagy. With Robinson, he never really came out and said anything. But it was there. I mean, you kind of felt it. His agent was on Twitter all the time chirping. And he's not doing that on his own. I mean, he works for the player. So it's out there. He clearly wasn't happy. Things kind of soured, and in LA, the Rams love him. I mean, he has been so far as advertised for the Rams, and he's gonna slide right into that role there and be one of their top players on that offense.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that he gets to go to an advanced offense that just came off a championship that has a target hog already on the team and Cooper Kupp. So, he doesn't have to necessarily worry about carrying that load. He's basically replacing that Robert Woods type role for the Rams. But I mean, if you kind of just look at what he was able to do in Chicago, that 2018 year, he was coming off of an ACL injury.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't necessarily have the best season, right? He had 55 grabs for 750 yards. Not great. That's over 13 games, 12 games started. So, he didn't have the best year, only 4 touchdowns, but you just felt like there was something more there. Hey, it's the first year off that ACL. But again, that's not exactly a statistically significant year for a wide receiver in the modern NFL. So you go to 2019 and he pops it to you. Everything that we wanted, right? It's 98 grabs, 1,149 yards, 7 touchdowns. Like, okay, now we go, right? This is the guy he's going to climb up the leaderboard. I wrote this big statistical article and I was like, he's going to break every record. Look, here's how it happens.
I was with you, right there with you.
And it made a lot of sense. And in 2020, it looked like I was, right on track, right? He had an even better year in 2020, 151 targets, 102 catches, 1,250 yards. So like about the same amount of targets as the year before, but he had 4 more grabs and a few more yards, 6 touchdowns. So again, he is just starting to like put together back-to-back campaigns. He just needs one more 1,000-yard campaign and he's going to break that record. There's been no Bears receiver that's had 1,000 yards more than in 2 seasons, right? And he's not that far away from making some significant gains to get up in the top 10. Like, this is going to be great. I had a whole tracker on Twitter, like ready to go, where I would like say, hey, he passed this guy, he passed that guy. I just kept track. And then at some point, 2021, it just fell apart. And I think that, again, we don't know this stuff in terms of, we don't have inside information or anything. We're not, we're not sharing anything that but if you're trying to just read the tea leaves, there was almost certainly a good contract offer put on the table. I'm not saying he should have taken it. I'm saying that there was something that was probably reasonable put in front of him. Events happen where, like, Keenan Allen signed his deal, and it now made that deal look like, well, that's not good enough. I need a little bit more. Ryan Pace said, no, like, this is what we had carved out for you. And they came to a stalemate. He ends up playing on the franchise tag in his last year. It's all soured. He doesn't necessarily have a very good year, and it leaves a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of Bears fans. I mean, even talking about Allen Robinson on Twitter or in an article, I mean, people just come out of the woodwork to say, like, basically, F him. I have no interest in talking about Allen Robinson. So I think that, 2021 is a lost year. So you really take that apart here. You've got 2021 and 2018 as kind of like non-years. And now you're only talking about 2 productive seasons for a wide receiver. It's tough to really make a case that he has this great place in Bears history with that production.
If the Bears were a more modern type franchise, then his numbers would really, be nothing. But as it is, he's 9th all time in receptions in Bears history. So, he put up some, for the Bears anyway, some good numbers in Chicago. But as far as the history, like I said, he only has 2 nice seasons. And then, of course, it was that sour taste in everyone's mouth, what happened there. And it's right. I mean, Twitter, social media, Facebook, the comment section at our site, fans really turned on Allen Robinson. And, he brought some of it on himself, but yeah, another thing I look at with that season is the offseason is that was the year the cap dropped, so that was the COVID year. I think had that not happened, I think the Bears may have figured out a way to kind of make a extension work with him. I mean, peak Allen Robinson, if he would have been peak Allen Robinson last season, he would have helped out Justin Fields.
Right.
If he would have somehow been under contract, let's say he would have been extended, having him in the fold in Chicago helps out Justin Fields. He's a good football player, but like a lot of fans, see, and like a lot of us see what he did on the field, he just did not seem like the same player. Offense is a part of it. Andy Dalton, Nick Foles, Justin Fields is part of it, but where can you put him when he just only has those 2 productive seasons as a Chicago Bear?
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So at the end of the top 100 list, there's a couple of wide receivers. So when you put Khalil Mack in the list, it moves everybody in the bottom 50 down 1. So we have to remember that. So on the original list, Marty Booker was 98 and Alshon Jeffrey was 99, and Curtis Conway was not on the list. He would have been probably in that next group of 10.
He was close, I remember. Yeah.
He was close. But those 3 guys grouped together pretty well. So you moved him down 1 with the inclusion of Max. So now you're talking about Booker at 99, Alshon at 100, Conway right off the table. And you look at those 2 productive seasons with being over 1,000 yards, one of them with 100 catches, and you compare it against those guys, and I found it difficult to put Allen Robinson above Alshon Jeffrey. I found it difficult to put Allen Robinson above Marty Booker. And I know our colleague Bill Zimmerman, Allen Robinson is a better player than Marty Booker. I know we all love Booker, but he's a better. That's not what this exercise is. Yeah. This is their impact on Chicago Bears history. And I have a hard, I really can't put him above Alshon. Alshon was drafted by the team. Alshon had some soft tissue issues and couldn't stay on the field, from health, but he was a, go get it, big ball wide receiver. He put up, really good numbers in a couple of seasons. And he was a guy that I just have a hard time saying that Allen Robinson was better than Alshon Jeffrey. Is he better than Marty Booker? I kind of don't. I mean, as a pure athlete, sure. As a pure receiver, sure. But again, in his production, and Booker was at it for longer in a Bears uniform, I can't put him above there either. So to me, I wasn't able to put Robinson in the top 100. Do you disagree with me? Would you put him in?
No, I mean, you can't. You mentioned those guys again. Those are good comps with Booker, with Conway, with Jeffrey. All three of those guys have more receptions in their Bears career. I believe they all have more yards. I think Alshon Jeffrey may be third all time. And yeah, he's third all time in Bears history with 4,500 yards. Again, we're talking about really pedestrian receiving numbers here, but for what he was, Alshon Jeffrey, in just his 4 seasons, third all time in receiving yards. So, you can't put him above those guys. And if those are guys at the bottom of the list, of course, he's not going to be above Harlan Hill, who's on our list somewhere. I'm not sure where we ended up putting him, but that's you got to look at the legacy, and we got to keep going back to it. He only had 2 productive seasons, and that really hurts his overall value to the franchise.
Yeah, so a bit of surprise for me when I was doing the exercise again. I thought that he'd be somewhere, but when I got into it, I just couldn't put him in. But I want to talk about these teams that these guys are now on. So, you know, if you look at betting odds or over unders, right? The These guys are now playing for 3 of the favorites
Yeah,
in the entire league to win the Super Bowl. So Hicks goes to the Bucks. They're the favorites in the NFC right now. With Brady coming back, with
yeah,
them kind of reloading, they're the favorites. Allen Robinson goes to the defending champion Rams. They're right there. They're right there with their betting odds. So the 2 top NFC teams that aren't wearing green and yellow, the there are now former Bears playing there, and good former Bears playing there. And then the Chargers are, I know that the Chargers didn't make the playoffs last year. I know that some people feel like they're getting a little overhyped, but this is a team that
it's a
loaded
good
up,
team. Yeah.
and they've got a lot of talent. They've got an emerging star at quarterback. They're going to be in a tough division, but it would not surprise me if the Chargers make a deep run as well. So you have 3 guys that could potentially be playing deep into the playoffs for a ring, and that gives Bears fans. And again, a lot of Bears fans probably aren't going to root for the Rams, but it gives Bears fans a lot of options to choose from, teams that are going to be competitive this year, because now you have that Bears connection to a couple of these contenders.
Real quick about A-Rob. I mean, yes, last season kind of souring him, but this is a guy that was very active off the field, very active in Chicago. His charity is still active in Chicago. He did a lot for the city of Chicago. And, I'm not going to let one bad year with a contract status, sour my outlook on A-Rob. I'm a fan. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to see all 3 of these guys do well. You know, I would think that of these 3, like you said, with Akiem Hicks, I think he has the best chance with Tom Brady and the Bucks. But the Chargers, yeah, they haven't made the playoffs last few years, but that's a young up and coming team. I mean, they have one of the best quarterbacks in the game, and this is a quarterback league. It's a tough division, sure, but the Chargers should be right there. The Rams are going to be right there. They have a proven system. They have a good quarterback as well. So these 3 teams should make deep runs in the playoffs, and it should be fun, at least as for Bears fans, because we're probably not going to see Justin Fields in the playoffs this season. So at least we got a few guys we can kind of watch. And, hey, that guy used to be a Bear. Let's at least cheer those guys on.
Yeah, the Chargers have long been my second team,
They have
so
been, yeah.
I'm very excited about the prospects of the Chargers maybe putting together a run. Chargers don't have a lot of fans, so I've always felt like okay about having a second team.
Why is that? That's weird. The Chargers have the coolest uniforms, I gotta say.
The powder blues are amazing, but even their other kits look really
Yeah.
good right now. Like they really do have a good uniform set. I mean, I'm partial to blue anyway, so that kind of works for me. But yeah, they've got a lot of fun players, and I'm excited for them. And again, it's an AFC team, so you only see them once every 4 years, and you don't really have to worry about split loyalties. And of course, if the Bears play them, of course I'm gonna cheer for the Bears. But yeah, that could be fun. And then in the next couple of years, maybe we see Justin versus Justin in the Super Bowl. That'd be the goal. So
you heard it here first. JB called it.
Yeah, there you go.
2023.
Yeah. So I think that overall, though, it is interesting to see these players move on, and you just give it a sense of where the Bears are in the cycle, in terms of rebuilding and competing, and where these guys are that do have value because they're now being considered some of those final pieces for teams that are looking to make a late run or a deep push into the playoffs. And so that's it. I think it's kind of cool to see, and we'll see if Ryan Poles decides that Robert Quinn is a trade chip in the season, and someone who he's trying to maybe pull a Von Miller type trade package for.
Feels like it, doesn't it?
It does feel like it,
Yeah.
right? Like you've got precedent set. You see if you can maybe pull some nice draft capital from someone if he's able to come out and have a strong start to his season. I'm curious to see if he's able to move Quinn. But real quick before we get out of here, I wanted to at least just mention Kyle Fuller. So Kyle Fuller recently signed with the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, he left last year, but I think that it's worth mentioning Kyle Fuller and his place in Bears history. So this is a corner that earned first team All Pro honors. That's not something that's happened very often. The Bears don't have a very deep corner history. I think Tillman's the best corner in team history. If you go way, way back, right, like Red Grange played corner, but like no one talks about Red Grange. He was a surprisingly good cornerback is what you read in the history books, and you're like, yeah, okay. But no one was talking about corners in the 1920s.
Yeah.
After that, though, there really isn't, there really aren't guys that have peaks like first team All Pro at corner. And so I'm curious to hear, you don't have to give me a number where he would live in that list, but, what do you think of Kyle Fuller's legacy as a Bear? Where would he maybe fit if we redid this list?
I remember when we did the list, the top 100, cornerback was tough for us because a lot of the guys are in the top of the stats with the interceptions. They didn't get the Pro Bowl accolades. You got J.C. Caroline, Rosie Taylor, the guys that played the secondary, Dave Witzel, Benny McCray. Some of these older guys was hard for us to kind of place, but I think with the guy like Fuller, I think he has the first team All Pro a few years back. He's been to a Pro Bowl. I think his peaks. I mean, he was a great fit for what the Bears wanted to do. He was a physical player. He fit for the city of Chicago because he played DB physical. And that's what we as Bears fans want. We want the guy like Peanut Tillman, Gary Fenton. We want those physical players in the secondary. I think in Kyle Fuller he was that. And again, we talk about guys that had strange careers. He basically had a gap year where he missed the whole season. And I don't think it ever came out what his injury was. There was never a surgery. It was just kind of one of those things where I believe the most that came out, it was something with it might have been a knee. Whatever it was, he didn't play. And as Bears fans, we all thought, oh, he's done.
Right.
And then he comes back and he thrives. So I think you got to kind of put that in place as well. And I think he made the all rookie team his first season. I remember he had a really good year as a rookie. Where does he fit in the all-time? I mean, he's definitely someone we're going to have to discuss towards the bottom part of it. But, you can't put him above some of his other corners we talked about. Charles Tillman is probably the best corner ever in Chicago history. So,
sure.
Where does Fuller put? It's hard to say right now, but he'll be in the conversation next time we do this list for sure.
Now, I will say we have Charles Tillman too high in our list,
probably,
but it's because we love him.
Yeah,
he is my favorite player of all time, and same. I know that it was my fault that I pushed a little bit too hard to get him a high ranking.
Well, I think the voting was all weighted vote, so wherever you put him in your group of 10, that's the number that he carried in inverse order. So I think you may have kept giving him that big boost.
I gave him a big boost, but I can't carry the whole vote myself. So other people were doing it with me.
But I'm sure I was. I'm a big fan as well.
Yeah, I'm part of that's my problem. But that I was really high on Ed Sprinkle, and that proved to be a nice thing.
Hall of Famer now.
Hall of Famer now. Yeah. So that was good to see. But anyway, fun stuff. I do think Kyle Fuller's on the list. But I do think it's probably somewhere in the 80s or 90s. And I'd have to really kind of study it to kind of see. I don't think he has a really good comp. I just don't think that he has someone who, just because the Bears cornerback history just isn't great in terms of, the guys, there's just a lot more interceptions back in the 60s and 70s. They're just kind of winging it around. Everybody seems to have interceptions. So you can't really go off of that. But I do think he has a place. And unfortunately, part of his legacy is that he was drafted one spot after probably the best defensive player ever. It was gonna be a Bear. Like, we were already making up 99 jerseys.
I was ready that season.
Donald in the back. I mean, man,
my God,
what a kick in the anyway. So I think that this is a good spot to just basically close the book on these guys and on this iteration of the Bears. I think from now on, not that we've been wallowing in the past or anything, but I think at this point it's like, okay, we have now tried to examine the legacy of these guys. Now we're moving on. Now it's the Ryan Poles era. He's putting his stamp on it. Let's move forward and see how he builds this team around Justin Fields and what this looks like.
It should be fun. I mean, this season may not be as exciting as we all want as Bears fans, but it's going to be fun. I mean, there's going to be a lot of interesting things happening with the offense. The defense. We talk about the past. It'd be a nod to the past with with some of the Lovie Smith principles, the hits philosophy that they have there. So it's going to be a fun season. We're going to have a team. I think as Bears fans, we can all be proud of. They're going to play to the whistle. They're going to play hard. Too often we saw the dumb penalty creep in, and that's something I don't think we're going to see much. It's going to happen. These guys are human. It'll happen once in a while, but I think that's something that, they're really making an effort to be a disciplined group of players. And I think that's going to shine on the field. And I think as fans, at least we'll have that to at least look to it and say, hey, we're Bears fans and it's okay to be Bears fans again. Let's wear the hats, the jerseys. Let's get out there.
Well, it's now June 1st and summer. I mean, to me, this is summer, right? I don't the official start of summer is until late of the month. I don't care. Like to me, when June's here, it's summer. So now we can start thinking about camp. We'll have some off-season content. I'm very close to releasing episode 1 of the Bears Hopium Den, which is my look at conversations with Bears fans and different angles and groups of where people come from. I've had a lot of fun recording those conversations. I'm ready to start rolling those out. I think I'll probably release episode 1 next week.
Oh,
and
nice.
that'll be a weekly thing where we go probably 10 episodes worth of content, and we'll kind of roll those out throughout the summer once a week and get an idea of what your fellow Bear fans are into and where they come from, and kind of what makes them tick and their thoughts on some of the happenings and what's going on with the franchise. So I think it's going to be a fun series. It's going to be a fun summer series. And we got a lot of other stuff that we're going to be working on as well. Anything that you want to plug before we get out of here?
It's the summer. I mean, right now, things are starting to slow down a little bit. There's one more OTA coming up, so I'm sure there'll be some news pop from that. Then, of course, the mandatory mini camp is towards the middle of June. But once that happens, then things get kind of quiet, and so you may see some crazy creative things going on from us at the site and the YouTube channel and the podcast channel.
Yep. So keep it tuned there, and we'll get out of here with the podcast. So thanks for joining us, guys, and see you next time. Bear down. All right. What do we got for questions or comments?
We got a few in here. It was all Senator Blatarski. He was carrying the comment section there for us. Just kind of chiming in. Hicks. Yeah, he did have some bad penalties towards the end of his run there, but I wonder how much frustration got to Hicks. Being in. With stuff was going on behind the scenes, and the same with A-Rod. I wanted to ask you this. I forgot to ask you on the show. Of the 3 guys, we all agree that Hicks probably has the best chance for a ring. Of the 3, who's going to have the best season on a personal level, Mack or A-Rod?
I think it's going to be Mack, and I think it's because he's with a creative defensive play caller. He's in the right scheme. They know how to use him. They've got an idea of what they want to do with him. I mean, Staley's not going to mess around. And then he's got tons of talent around him. So it's not like they can isolate him and just, we'll take him out. We'll scheme around Mack and we'll go over here. They can't really do that. They've got Joey Bosa. They've got Derwin James. They've got a ton of playmakers on that side of the ball in a very interesting scheme. So I think that Mack is set up to really have a huge bounce back here.
I know he's a little older now, but I see him having the same kind of impact. Yeah, when he came to Chicago.
Yeah,
he's going to have that kind of impact. You mentioned Bosa. Oh my God, who are you going to double team on that line? Because Bosa always gets the double team,
right?
So it's going to be crazy to watch. But then I think A-Rob's going to have a nice niche there too. Yeah, you mentioned Kupp, but they don't have Woods. They don't have OBJ. Allen Robinson is, he's clearly going to be their, one of their top 2 receivers. I think he's gonna have a big year in LA as well.
I really think that Woods is the right. I mean, he's gone.
Yeah.
Woods was very underrated. I mean, you look at his 2020, Woods had 90 catches for 936 yards. Year before that, 90 catches for 1,100 yards. Year before that, 86 catches for 1,200 yards. I think that those stats are available
Hmm.
to A Rob in that system. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to flirt with 1,000 yards. Well, especially with the 17 games, if he can stay healthy, he should get 1,000 yards and around that 90 catch mark. I mean, they're still going to feed Cooper Cup, number
Yeah.
one. He's just proven to be such a. I mean, he won the Triple Crown. I
Ridiculous
mean, it
player.
was insane. So I don't see that changing. But those are good, solid years. I mean, that's a great number two line, right? But he doesn't have to be the number one, and I think that works for him.
And I think those separation numbers that he was so bad with in Chicago, I don't think we're going to see him being that. I mean, he is a precise route runner, but when you're running the same stupid route all the time in Chicago, it's hard to really do anything. I mean, you can't really set up your curl route. There's really nothing to do there. So it's like given a chance to be in a more offense where there's more stuff going across the field, more stuff in the middle of the field, more stuff where you can kind of at least give a move and let his footwork get him open. Then he's not the biggest guy, but he's still a pretty big receiver. So I think with A-Rob, I think he's in a real nice season. And it would not surprise me to see them and the Bucks, in the NFC title game.
Yeah, honestly, all three could have really good years. And like you said, Hicks signed in a really good space because he's basically I think it feels like he's basically replacing Sue.
Hmm.
And then you have there's another player that off the top of my head I can't remember, but
Vita
well I mean
Vea.
there's Vita Vea, but like Vea, but I think there's another player that'll probably rotate snaps with
Oh, the
Hicks.
rookie they picked up. I can't
Yeah.
his name escapes me. Yeah, but it's gonna be a nice rotation. I mean, if I was on a show earlier today, I talked about if Hicks' snap count is down, and I think he was overused in Chicago a little
Oh
bit.
yeah.
I think if his snap count's down, 60%,
Right.
in that range, maybe even a little less, depending on the game flow, team situation. I mean, the Bucks are going to be good. So if the Bucks are up a lot, I think Akiem Hicks goes to the bench and just rests. I mean, he's 32 years old, so I think it's one of those things where my partner's gone here. Are you still there, JB? Technical difficulties. Oh, if you're watching on Second City Gridiron, I guess I'm going to sign us out here because JB's has some technical difficulties. So you guys that hung out with us for the duration, I appreciate it. Make sure you guys, if you missed anything, go back and watch the replay, or you can always check us out on the Windy City Gridiron podcast channel. So until next time, bear down, my friends.